There's a decision almost all of us make without realizing we've made it. We say to ourselves, I'll think about that. Maybe next year. Let's see what happens. I'm just not ready to decide yet. And somehow that feels different from saying yes or saying no. It feels like we haven't made a decision, but we have. If you decide to wait another year before investing, you've made a decision about what happens with that money for another year. If you stay in a job for another year because you're not ready to decide what's next, you've made a decision about where you'll spend another year of your career. If you and your spouse keep postponing the same financial conversation, you've made a decision to continue exactly as you are. And I'm not saying any of those decisions are wrong. I'm saying something much more. Not deciding is still making a decision. Once I understood that, I started looking at later very differently. Let's look at why later feels differently. I think that there's a reason we don't see later as a decision. Yes, it feels permanent, later tomorrow, later the next day. But yes feels permanent. No feels permanent. It feels like, okay, yes, I made a decision. No, I didn't. So later actually is a safe decision. It makes us feel safe. Later lets us believe all of our options are still sitting there waiting for us whenever we are ready. But are they really? I'm going to challenge you. Are they really waiting? Because while we're waiting, things are still happening. Life moves on. The market changes, interest rates change, property prices change. Our income changes, our families change. We get older. We don't want to, but we do. And sometimes our priorities change completely. So later doesn't freeze the decision. It just postpones it, if you will. It changes the circumstances under which we'll eventually make the decision. I've had conversations with people who tell me they're going to wait another year before buying an investment property. And sometimes waiting is absolutely the right decision because it's just not the right time. Maybe their finances need to change a bit. They need to improve their credit score a bit. Maybe they don't understand enough yet. As in my last video, they hadn't consumed enough information. Maybe the property that they were looking at doesn't even make sense. Maybe life simply isn't in the right place for them right now. But there's an important difference between I've looked at this and decided waiting a year makes sense. So I've looked at real estate investing and I've decided waiting a year makes sense. Or I'll think about it again next. So one is a decision and the other one feels like you've avoided making one. Because a year later, you or that person or myself, we aren't standing in exactly the same place. Maybe houses cost more. Maybe they cost less. Maybe the interest rates went up. Maybe they went down. Maybe the whole financing has changed in terms of how you qualify for financing. Maybe your income changed. Or maybe you found an entirely different type of opportunity. We just don't know now. And that's the point because it's later. So we don't know what's going to happen later. Waiting didn't protect you or me from uncertainty. It simply exposes us to a different kind of uncertainty. And this just isn't about real estate or real estate investing either. And it's not a real estate lesson. So you probably know someone who they have been unhappy in their job for a really long time. And they have all the intention of leaving the job someday, later, next year. Maybe they're waiting for another opportunity. Maybe they have to relocate. We just don't know, but we put it off for tomorrow. And let me tell you about a situation that I recently heard about where someone had worked for a company for over 15 years. They really didn't like their job, but they always said, well, I'm going to look for a job or I'm just going to hold out until I can retire. I'm going to hold out, even though I don't like this job that I'm going to go to every year. And you know what happened? That person unexpectedly got laid off after 15 years. They were completely caught off guard. They had no idea. And so not only are they facing a financial circumstance of their income changing, the thing that they put off for later, they had some certainty when they said, I'll put it off later. Well, now they have an uncertainty situation because it caught them off guard. Their income is going to change overnight. And so now, rather than making the decision that they put off later, because that really was a decision not to look for another job, they made that decision later. Well, now their circumstances has changed. And so later today is a lot different than what it looked like even yesterday for that person. So you may be sitting there thinking, I'm going to think about that tomorrow, or I'm going to think about that next year. So I'm going to give you an example of real estate investing. Recently, I went to a networking group, and one of my niche things that I handle is working with families who have had a loved one recently pass away. And I've cultivated that and built a network to help families kind of navigate when they have real estate to sell. So I was talking to someone about that, and they said, "Oh, well, I could never do that, or I'll think about that tomorrow. I will learn about it. Is there a way I can take one of your classes? But I don't want to do that till next year." Well, you know what? People die every single day of the year. And so, yes, you can put it off later. And yes, that won't change those circumstances, but the market will change because now what's happening is my business has seen more calls from distressed sellers because the market has changed and houses are sitting on the market longer. So families who need to change, whether their home needs repair or not, are calling us for a faster solution than waiting 90 to 120 days. They already have seen what's happening when they put it off for later, and now they're trying to change their circumstance. Someone who's not taking advantage of that right now is just putting off something that the market will not be the same maybe next year. That's the uncertainty we don't know about. Another example, this is probably hits more closer to home, but every January, what do? We make a commitment to do A, B, and C. The gym comes to mind. Every January, we say, okay, we're going to go to the gym. We're going to lose 20 pounds because we've been putting it off. And what happens? December rolls around and maybe we did join the gym, maybe lost 10 pounds, not 20. We still have the same job. Staying was the right choice at the time, but you never actually consider alternatives because staying necessarily was a conscious decision. It became the default. Or maybe in January, we said, this is the year I'm going to get a new job. And then December rolls around and guess what? We still have the same job. So maybe staying was the right choice, but if you've never actually considered alternatives, staying wasn't necessarily a conscious decision. It was just what we did. It became the default decision. Or think about yourself, your parents, or maybe another couple that family members who keep saying, we really need to sit down and talk about retirement because retirement's down the road. We always put it off till later. And then next month comes around. And then we're going to do it after we come back from vacation. Or now we're going to do it after the holidays. Or we're going to do it when work slows down. But guess what? So apparently work is going to slow down someday. What people tell themselves is that 3 years later, they still have not had the conversation. So they decided not to plan, or rather they didn't decide not to plan, but every month that they put off that conversation and they postponed it, they continued with the plan they already had. So that became the default decision because they didn't change it. And that's the part we don't notice. When we don't choose something new, we're usually choosing more of what we already have. So let me say that again. When we don't choose something new, we're usually choosing more of what we already have. And the person that I was telling you about that got let go from their job after 15 years, that wasn't part of their retirement. They always had a plan that they would work 20 years and then they would retire. And so now they have found themselves 5 years short of this plan of retirement that they did not plan for. So they didn't make a conscious decision not to plan. They made a default decision to say, okay, we're not going to change how we're going to retire. This is how we're going to retire. And they never had that conversation later because they just did more of what they had. And whether we know it or not, we make these default decisions all the time. We keep our money where it's always been. We don't change bank accounts or put it in a higher yield. We stay in the same job day in, day out, year after year. We keep the same house, and we don't have the conversations that would move us forward into making other decisions that, whether they're financial decisions or vacation decisions, we just don't look at other options. We just keep doing what worked last year. And part of that is just because it feels comfortable. And sometimes the default is absolutely the best choice. So, not to say that default decisions are bad, just recognize that when we choose to continue doing what we've been doing, that becomes the default decision. And sometimes the default decision is the right decision. I'll give you an example. So keeping the house. So right now I'm keeping my house because why? I have a 3.25 interest rate. So it makes sense for me to keep my house. The house prices are a little bit higher. So I'm keeping my house. Staying in the job might be the right move for you right now because you might need health insurance. Maybe you have a great job. Maybe you love your job. It's flexible and there's everything you like about it. If you don't like your job, maybe you're staying because, the market is unsteady. You're not sure, where you want to go. And so you keep staying in the job. That becomes default, good or bad, right or wrong. It's the choices for you. Not buying an investment property may be the right decision, but I think there's a huge difference between choosing the status quo and simply ending up there. One is intentional. The other happened while you were deciding. Let me show you what I mean. Let me give you an example. So here's what I mean. Maybe you're considering buying a rental. Waiting means you keep your money where it is. You don't buy the rental. And that's one fact. But property prices, interest rates, rents, your income, and the opportunities available to you may continue to change. That doesn't mean buy the property. It means include waiting when you're evaluating your choices. So let me just say that again. It means putting waiting on that column, right? To what happens if I wait? What happens to my income? What happens to the market? What happens to interest rates? So you have to consider in your decision-making process, waiting as one of those elements. Waiting is an option. If I'm making a decision and I want to decide later, how do I go about doing it? So instead of telling yourself you have to make the decision today, I think there's a better question. If I decide to revisit this 6 months or a year from now, what stays the same while I'm waiting and what keeps changing? Let's just take real estate investing. If I just stay the same, I'm watching YouTube, listening to the Money Making Mamas podcast. Nothing's really changing, right? However, you're staying the same. This is you. You are staying the same. You're not going to look at houses or anything like that. But over here, what keeps changing? Well, I'm going to put down interest rates because they seem like, whether up or down. The market itself, like buyer market versus a seller's market. If I'm investing and someone else is not, then there's missed opportunities, not always. But over here, what stays the same? Maybe you have to work on your cash, your budget, so what stays the same? You're not increasing income and you're not taking on debt, but over here, it could be missed opportunities through a second source of income. And that's just one example. We could do vacation, right? What stays the same? You don't go anywhere. Or maybe you're saving for a better trip. So that stays the same. The decision to not travel today, not travel this year. And then what keeps changing? Well, airfare, resort prices, your destination might change. It's all subjective. What stays the same for you is not going to be the same for me. And what keeps changing for you is not going to be the same as for me. And when we go back to investment properties, so maybe you are considering buying a rental this year. Waiting means you keep your money where it is. So you don't purchase, but you keep your money where it is, right? But as I said, property prices, income opportunities, rents, all these things could keep changing. But that doesn't mean you should go out and buy a property. So it means that you're making a decision for waiting. Waiting is the decision while you're evaluating choices. So waiting becomes one of your options, one of your decision. Waiting is one, and only you can decide if waiting is an option that you want to do. So you can look at the same, changing, don't go anywhere, save your money. Just know that things change while you're waiting, but waiting is definitely an option. And sometimes waiting is the exact thing that you need to do. Once you find out if that's one of the options and how it impacts the decision-making process. The next time you hear yourself saying, I'll decide later, don't pressure yourself into making a decision you're just not ready to make. Instead, I want you to recognize that later is one of the choices. And ask yourself this: if I don't make a different decision, what am I choosing to continue? And maybe your answer is my current job, my current investment plan, my current source of income, my current house, my current financial habits. And maybe you're perfectly comfortable with that answer. And that's good. Then waiting becomes and may be an intentional decision. But if you're not comfortable with the answer, that's worth paying attention to. Because not deciding doesn't leave your future blank. It usually means the life you're living now keeps filling in the page. And remember, not deciding is still making a decision. And I want to leave you with this. If real estate investing is one of those decisions you've been putting in the maybe someday category, I'm not going to tell you that today is the day you should buy a rental property. It may not be, but I do think you should have enough clarity to make an intentional decision about whether or not real estate belongs in the financial options you are creating. And that's why I created my free masterclass called Build Income Beyond Your Paycheck. It was designed not to talk you into becoming a real estate investor, quite the opposite. It gives you the 6 milestones that I have personally used to build my rental portfolio. And if it makes sense for you, rather than leaving the decision sitting in the I'll think about later pile, then the video will give you clarity. And you'll find the link below in the description.